The year is 1817. Deep in the Tennessee wilderness lies the quiet town of Adams, a farming community bound by tradition and faith. But for one family, the Bells, their idyllic life is about to take a terrifying turn. This is the story of the Bell Witch, America's most famous haunting. A tale of spirits, vengeance, and the unexplained that continues to baffle historians and paranormal investigators alike. Over 200 years later, the legend of the Bell Witch endures. From books and documentaries to Hollywood films, the story has captivated countless minds. But how much of it is truth, and how much is folklore? Join us as we unravel the chilling tale of the Bell Witch. John Bell was a farmer of Scottish descent who moved his family to Adams, Tennessee, in 1804. With his wife Lucy and their children, he hoped to build a new life in the fertile lands of the Red River Valley. The Bell family prospered for many years, living in peace on their 320-acre farm. But in 1817, their peaceful life began to unravel. John Bell noticed strange disturbances on his land. At first, it was subtle, animals behaving oddly, crops failing without explanation, and an oppressive feeling that something wasn't quite right. The first undeniable sign of trouble came when John Bell encountered a bizarre animal on his property, a creature with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Bell shot at it, but the creature disappeared into thin air. From that moment, the Bell family became the target of something far more sinister. The disturbances began small. Knocking sounds echoed through the house at night, growing louder with each passing day. Furniture moved on its own, and objects seemed to vanish without explanation. Soon, the activity turned violent. The Bell children were pulled from their beds by invisible hands, and hair was yanked from their heads. The youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, bore the brunt of the attacks. The entity slapped her, left scratches on her skin, and even pulled her hair with alarming force. The family's fear turned to desperation as the spirit began speaking. The entity claimed to be a spirit named Kate, and it quickly earned the name, the Bell Witch. It was cruel, mocking the family and predicting calamities. Yet, at times, it showed an odd kindness toward Lucy Bell, John's wife, offering her comforting words and compliments. As news of the haunting spread, curious neighbors and visitors flocked to the Bell home, hoping to witness the strange phenomena. The spirit seemed to enjoy the attention, answering questions and even quoting Bible verses with eerie precision. Among the visitors was Andrew Jackson, a future U.S. president. Jackson, intrigued by the stories, decided to investigate the Bell Witch for himself. According to legend, Jackson and his men were tormented during their stay. Their horses refused to move, and one man claimed to feel a phantom slap across his face. Jackson allegedly declared, "I'd rather face the entire British Army than spend another night with the Bell Witch." By 1820, the Bell Witch's attacks focused almost entirely on John Bell. He grew weaker by the day, his health deteriorating rapidly. The spirit taunted him relentlessly, calling him Old Jack Bell and vowing to end his life. On December 20, 1820, John Bell was found dead in his bed. Beside him was a mysterious vial containing an unknown liquid. The Bell Witch claimed responsibility for his death, boasting that she had poisoned him. To test the claim, the family gave the liquid to a cat, which died instantly. The vial was thrown into the fire, and the flames erupted in a strange, unnatural color. Over the years, countless theories have emerged about the Bell Witch. Was it the spirit of Kate Batts, a neighbor who had a feud with John Bell? Or was it a manifestation of guilt and stress within the family, fueled by superstition and fear? The Bell Witch could have been a hoax, orchestrated by one of the family members. Some even believe it was Betsy herself, seeking attention or rebelling against her father. Others argue that the phenomena were too widespread and consistent to be faked. Paranormal enthusiasts believe the Bell Witch was a malevolent spirit or even a poltergeist, feeding on the family's fear and anguish. So, what do you think happened to the Bell family? Was it the wrath of a vengeful spirit, or something more grounded in human psychology and folklore? The Bell Witch remains a mystery, a haunting tale that refuses to fade into history. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Cryptoverse, where we uncover the mysteries that keep you up at night. In the early 19th century, the bustling streets of London held more than just merchants and tradesmen. In Hammersmith, fear stalked the fog-filled streets, not of a criminal, but of a ghost. What began as whispers of the supernatural would soon lead to tragedy, scandal, and an enduring question: can fear be a defense for murder? Hammersmith, a quaint village west of central London, was an area filled with hard-working townsfolk, cobbled roads, and dimly lit alleys. In 1803, stories began circulating about a ghostly apparition haunting the churchyard. Witnesses claimed it was the spirit of a man who had committed suicide a year earlier. According to local lore, the ghost wore a white shroud, blending eerily with the mist. Some said it moaned and groaned, while others claimed it leaped out to frighten unsuspecting passers-by. The tales were enough to send chills through the entire village. But what began as ghost stories quickly escalated into mass hysteria. Sightings became more frequent, and the tales more dramatic. One pregnant woman claimed the ghost had terrified her so badly that she fainted, later losing her child. Another man alleged he was chased by the specter and only escaped by jumping into a ditch. Frustrated and frightened, the people of Hammersmith took matters into their own hands. Armed patrols began scouring the streets at night, determined to capture the ghost, or whatever it was. Among these vigilantes was Francis Smith, a local man who would soon make history for all the wrong reasons. On the night of January 3, 1804, Smith was on high alert. The ghost had reportedly been seen just days earlier, and tension was at an all-time high. As Smith patrolled the streets, his musket at the ready, he spotted a figure in white emerging from the shadows. Believing he had come face to face with the infamous ghost, Smith shouted for the figure to stop. But the figure didn't respond. Panic and adrenaline surged through Smith, and without hesitation, he fired his musket. To Smith's horror, the figure he had shot was not a ghost, but a man, a local bricklayer named Thomas Millwood. Millwood had been walking home in his work clothes, white trousers, a white waistcoat, and a white apron, which tragically resembled the ghostly descriptions. The death of Thomas Millwood sent shockwaves through Hammersmith. Francis Smith was immediately arrested and charged with murder. At his trial, Smith insisted that he genuinely believed Millwood was the ghost and that he had acted out of fear. The prosecution argued that Smith had acted recklessly, firing his weapon without verifying his target. The jury faced a difficult decision: was this a case of justifiable self-defense, or had Smith's actions been driven by paranoia and hysteria? In the end, Smith was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. However, public sympathy for his case was so overwhelming that his sentence was later commuted to a year of hard labor. But what about the ghost? Shortly after Millwood's death, the truth behind the Hammersmith ghost came to light. It turned out that a local man had been dressing up in a white sheet to scare his neighbors, thinking it was a harmless prank. Little did he know, his antics would contribute to such a tragic outcome. The man confessed and expressed deep regret for his actions. But by then, the damage was done. A man was dead, and Hammersmith's ghost stories would never be the same. The Hammersmith ghost murder didn't just haunt the people involved, it also left a lasting impact on British law. The case raised an important question: can someone be held responsible for a crime if they genuinely believed they were acting in self-defense? This debate would resurface nearly 2 centuries later in legal discussions, with experts often citing the case as an early example of the complexities surrounding self-defense laws. Today, Hammersmith is a thriving neighborhood, but the ghost stories of 1804 remain an enduring part of its history. The tragedy of Thomas Millwood and the hysteria that led to his death serve as a reminder of the dangers of fear and superstition. The Hammersmith ghost case is a fascinating blend of folklore, psychology, and law. It shows how deeply fear can affect human behavior and how important it is to question what we think we know. In the age of social media, where rumors and urban legends can spread like wildfire, the Hammersmith ghost case feels surprisingly relevant. Could a similar tragedy unfold today, fueled by modern hysteria and misinformation? While we may no longer fear ghosts in the same way, the lessons of 1804 remind us to question our perceptions, think critically, and never let fear cloud our judgment. The Hammersmith ghost murder was a tragedy born of fear and misunderstanding, but its legacy endures. It's a story that asks us to confront the unknown with reason, not panic, and to remember that sometimes, the greatest dangers lie not in the supernatural, but in ourselves. Cryptoverse viewers, welcome back. Today, we're traveling back to 1940s Adelaide, Australia, a city shrouded in intrigue and inexplicable events. Most of you may be familiar with the infamous Tamamshud case, a mystery that has perplexed investigators and conspiracy theorists for decades. But did you know that Adelaide had another enigma, one that seems to echo the Somerton Man story? A forgotten mystery lost to time. This is the case of Charlie from Adelaide. It all began in the summer of 1947, a year before the Somerton Man was discovered lifeless on Somerton Beach. A disoriented man appeared on the outskirts of Adelaide, wandering aimlessly. He was taken into custody by local authorities, who found him to be an enigma. He didn't have any identification, and to make matters worse, he didn't seem to know who he was. The man, who came to be known as Charlie, appeared to be in his late 30s. He spoke in fragments of multiple languages, none of them fluent or intelligible. Witnesses described his behavior as peculiar, almost otherworldly, as if he had no memory of how he ended up in Adelaide, or why. Charlie carried with him a single possession, a small notebook filled with indecipherable symbols. The pages were covered in what experts later described as a bizarre blend of Arabic, Cyrillic, and something entirely unknown. The symbols weren't words, at least not in any known language. They were more like codes, designed to conceal rather than reveal. Local authorities initially thought Charlie was a missing person suffering from amnesia. But as days turned into weeks, their investigation hit a dead end. Fingerprints and photographs were circulated across Australia, but no matches were found. Meanwhile, the notebook became the centerpiece of the case. Experts from universities and cryptography enthusiasts were brought in to decipher the notebook. Theories ranged from it being a personal shorthand to an advanced spy cipher. However, every theory crumbled when faced with the sheer randomness of the symbols. The notebook seemed to be a puzzle with no solution. This was the post-World War II era, a time when the Cold War was taking shape and espionage was rampant. Some theorized that Charlie was a foreign operative, possibly caught in the crosshairs of an undercover operation. His notebook? A codebook meant for covert communication. But if that were the case, why was Charlie abandoned with no apparent backup? Had his mission failed? Or was he betrayed? Others suggested that Charlie might have been a victim of mental illness. Conditions like schizophrenia can lead to disorganized speech and behavior, as well as the creation of unique symbols or languages. Could Charlie's notebook have been a manifestation of his inner world, a way to make sense of a reality he couldn't grasp? Then there's the question of whether Charlie's case was somehow connected to the Somerton Man. The timing is uncanny. Charlie disappeared in 1947, and the Somerton Man was discovered in 1948. Both cases involved cryptic elements, a notebook of symbols in one, and a Persian poetry book with a torn page in the other. Could they have been part of the same mystery? Two pieces of a larger puzzle? After months of investigation, Charlie vanished. Witnesses claim to have seen him walking out of Adelaide, heading toward the Australian outback. Despite a massive search effort, neither Charlie nor his notebook were ever seen again. Some believe he succumbed to the harsh wilderness. Others think he deliberately disappeared either to evade capture or to complete his mysterious mission. So why was Charlie's case forgotten while the Somerton Man became legendary? Perhaps it was the lack of a body, or perhaps the timing. Or maybe, as some theorists suggest, Charlie's case was intentionally buried to hide something larger, a secret we're not meant to uncover. Charlie's story reminds us that not all mysteries capture the public imagination equally. But that doesn't make them any less important or intriguing. Now, it's your turn. What do you think happened to Charlie? Was he a spy, a lost soul, or something else entirely? And do you believe his case is connected to the Somerton Man? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and remember, some mysteries are meant to be explored, not solved. See you on the next journey through the cryptoverse. June 10, 1912. A small town in Iowa. By morning, the serenity of Villisca would be shattered forever. 8 people, including 6 children, were murdered in their sleep with no apparent motive and no clear suspect. Over 110 years later, the Villisca axe murders remain an unsolved enigma, shrouded in speculation, superstition, and sorrow. To understand this mystery, we must go back to the night it all began. Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were well known in Villisca. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the family attended a church event. Alongside them were 2 young guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, who planned to spend the night at the Moore residence. The next morning, the neighbor, Mary Peckham, found the house eerily quiet and called for help. Josiah's brother Ross discovered the grisly scene. Each victim was struck with an axe. The killer appeared methodical, mirrors were covered, and a slab of bacon was left beside the weapon. A lamp with the wick removed was used for dim lighting. In 1912, forensic science was still in its infancy. Investigators faced a perplexing crime scene with few clues. Local law enforcement and townspeople contaminated the scene by entering out of curiosity. The axe used belonged to Josiah Moore. The killer appeared to have stayed in the house, possibly eating food from the kitchen. The killer left no clear fingerprints or blood trails outside the home. But the lack of modern forensic techniques left investigators relying on circumstantial evidence and unreliable testimonies. With no arrest in sight, fear spread like wildfire. Over the years, several suspects emerged, each with compelling, yet inconclusive, evidence tying them to the crime. Frank F. Jones, a local politician and business rival of Josiah Moore. Rumors suggested Josiah had an affair with Jones' daughter-in-law. No concrete evidence tied Jones to the crime, but his name remains linked to the case. William Blackie Mansfield, a known axe murderer who killed his family in a similar fashion. Investigators suspected a pattern, but no solid evidence placed him in Villisca. Reverend George Kelly, an itinerant preacher known for his erratic behavior. He attended the same Children's Day program as the Moore family. Allegedly confessed to the murders, but later recanted. Kelly's trial resulted in an acquittal. Some theorize the crime was committed by an unknown transient. Similar unsolved murders in the Midwest during this period add weight to the serial killer theory. Each suspect brought more questions than answers. With no DNA evidence or reliable eyewitnesses, the case grew colder as the years passed. As decades passed, the Villisca axe murders became a focal point for paranormal enthusiasts. Visitors to the Moore house report eerie phenomena, footsteps, voices, and unexplained shadows. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the Villisca axe murder house stands as a grim reminder of a crime that shook a community to its core. Even today, experts and amateur sleuths continue to analyze the case. Could advances in technology finally solve this mystery? Discuss how modern techniques like DNA testing could potentially shed light on the case if evidence were preserved. Why did the killer target the Moore family? Did they act alone, or was it a coordinated effort? And most hauntingly, why has the truth remained buried for over a century? The Villisca axe murders remain one of America's darkest mysteries. A century later, the silence of that fateful night still echoes through the walls of the Moore house. Perhaps the answers will never come. But the questions, they will linger forever. Thank you for exploring this chilling mystery with Cryptoverse. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more unsolved tales from the cryptic corners of history.
In the early days of exploration, when maps were riddled with blanks and uncharted territories loomed as great mysteries, there was a man who stood apart. Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett was not just an explorer, he was a dreamer, a man driven by an insatiable belief that the world still held secrets. Born in 1867, Fawcett was raised in an era when the allure of the unknown could shape destinies. He was a man of science, a meticulous surveyor, but also a romantic, captivated by tales of lost cities and ancient civilizations. By the early 20th century, Fawcett had already made a name for himself. He was an esteemed member of the Royal Geographical Society, undertaking numerous expeditions to map uncharted regions of South America. The dense Amazon rainforest, with its labyrinthine rivers and impenetrable foliage, became his domain. His skill in navigating this unforgiving landscape was unparalleled. He was meticulous in his observations, charting not only the geography but also the wildlife, flora, and the indigenous tribes he encountered. But there was one story, one tantalizing legend, that would come to dominate his life. Deep in the heart of the Amazon, Fawcett believed, lay the remnants of an ancient, advanced civilization. He called this lost city Z. The idea wasn't born of mere fantasy. Fawcett had collected accounts from indigenous tribes, historical texts, and even a mysterious manuscript known as the Manuscript 512, housed in the National Library of Brazil. Written by a Portuguese explorer in the 1700s, the manuscript described a grand city of stone, with towering arches and statues, hidden deep in the jungle. Fawcett's obsession with Z grew over the years. He was convinced that finding this city would rewrite the history of human civilization, challenging the Eurocentric narrative that placed advanced development solely in the hands of Europeans. To Fawcett, Z was not merely a city, it was evidence of a sophisticated culture that had thrived long before the arrival of the conquistadors. By 1925, Fawcett was ready to embark on what he believed would be his final and greatest expedition. He was joined by his eldest son, Jack, and Jack's close friend, Raleigh Rymel. The three men, along with a small team of local guides, were determined to penetrate the heart of the Amazon, a region so vast and hostile that it had swallowed countless explorers before them. They carried with them the barest essentials, machetes, compasses, notebooks, and provisions. Fawcett believed that traveling light and respecting the land would be key to their success. Their journey began in Cuiabá, a small frontier town in Brazil, where they stocked up on supplies and gathered information from locals. From there, they ventured into the unknown. Days turned into weeks as they hacked their way through dense jungle, crossed treacherous rivers, and endured the relentless onslaught of insects. The heat was oppressive, and the air was thick with humidity. Yet, Fawcett pressed on, his determination unwavering. The expedition encountered numerous challenges. Provisions ran low, and the group was often forced to subsist on whatever the jungle provided. They faced hostile wildlife, from venomous snakes to jaguars. At one point, Jack fell ill, his body weakened by the constant exposure to the elements. But his father's resolve seemed to fuel him, and he pushed forward despite his condition. Fawcett's journals, recovered years later, provide a glimpse into the journey. His entries speak of strange encounters with indigenous tribes who lived deep within the forest, tribes that had little to no contact with the outside world. Some were friendly, offering food and guidance, while others were wary, their spears a constant reminder of the dangers that surrounded the explorers. Yet, Fawcett respected these tribes, treating them with a dignity that was uncommon among explorers of his time. He believed that their knowledge of the land was invaluable and that they held clues to the location of Z. As the expedition delved deeper into the jungle, the landscape began to change. The dense foliage gave way to strange, open clearings. They discovered remnants of ancient structures, broken pottery, stone carvings, and what appeared to be the foundations of long-forgotten dwellings. Fawcett was convinced they were on the right track. He wrote of feeling a palpable sense of history in the air, as if the jungle itself was guarding the secrets of an ancient world. But as the weeks turned into months, contact with the outside world ceased. The last known communication from Fawcett was a letter sent to his wife, Nina, from a remote trading post. In it, he spoke of their progress and his unshakable belief that they were close to their goal. "We are on the verge of great discovery," he wrote. "Do not fear failure." After that, the expedition vanished without a trace. The disappearance of Percy Fawcett and his team became one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Over the years, countless expeditions have been launched to uncover their fate. Some have returned with tantalizing clues, bones believed to belong to Fawcett, reports of a white man living among an isolated tribe, and even rumors of a journal hidden in the jungle. But none have definitively solved the mystery. Theories abound. Some believe that Fawcett and his team were killed by hostile tribes, their bodies consumed by the jungle. Others speculate that they succumbed to disease or starvation. There are even those who suggest that Fawcett found Z and chose to remain there, leaving behind the modern world to embrace the ancient civilization he had so long sought. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Fawcett's story is not his disappearance but the enduring mystery of Z itself. In recent years, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of vast, complex societies that once thrived in the Amazon. These discoveries, including massive earthworks, intricate road systems, and advanced agricultural techniques, suggest that the region was home to millions of people before the arrival of Europeans. Could these findings be the remnants of Z, the city that Fawcett dreamed of? The story of Percy Fawcett is one of ambition, obsession, and the enduring human spirit. It is a reminder of the vastness of our world and the mysteries that still lie hidden within it. Fawcett's legacy endures not because of what he found, but because of what he sought, a deeper understanding of our shared past and the belief that the world still holds secrets worth discovering. And so, the jungle keeps its secrets. The story of Colonel Percy Fawcett and the lost city of Z remains one of history's greatest enigmas, a testament to the enduring allure of the unknown. The mystery of Colonel Percy Fawcett has grown over the decades, becoming a tale that blends fact and legend in equal measure. His disappearance ignited a wave of curiosity, fueling expeditions, books, and even films that sought to unravel what really happened in the Amazon jungle. But despite the fascination, the truth remains elusive, hidden beneath the dense canopy of trees and the passage of time. Fawcett's quest for Z was not just about finding a city. It was about rewriting the narrative of history. In his time, the prevailing belief among Western scholars was that the Amazon was incapable of sustaining large, complex civilizations. The idea of a thriving society in the heart of the jungle was dismissed as fantasy, a notion fueled by the racist and colonialist attitudes of the era. Fawcett, however, was ahead of his time. He believed the jungle was not an inhospitable wasteland but a cradle of ancient culture, teeming with life and history. What drove him to this conviction? It wasn't just the manuscript 512 or the artifacts he encountered on his earlier expeditions. Fawcett was also influenced by the indigenous people he met, who spoke of ancient cities and advanced ancestors. These stories, passed down through generations, were dismissed by most outsiders, but Fawcett listened. He respected their knowledge and believed their accounts held grains of truth. But his obsession with Z came at a cost. Fawcett's single-minded pursuit of his dream strained his relationships, particularly with his wife, Nina. Though she supported his ambitions, she was left to raise their children largely on her own while he ventured into the unknown. In her letters, she wrote of her longing for his return, her unwavering belief in his mission, and her heartbreak over his prolonged absences. After his disappearance, Nina campaigned tirelessly to keep his legacy alive, refusing to accept that he might be gone forever. In the decades following Fawcett's vanishing, the mystery only deepened. Expeditions sent to find him often met with misfortune. Some returned empty-handed, while others disappeared entirely, adding to the mystique of the tale. Rumors swirled of treasure hunters finding cryptic carvings or stumbling upon abandoned campsites believed to belong to Fawcett. One particularly persistent rumor told of an indigenous tribe in the Amazon that guarded the graves of 3 white men. Was this Fawcett, Jack, and Raleigh? No one could say for certain. In the 1950s, an explorer named Harold Wilkins claimed to have found a letter from Fawcett in which he described being captured by a secretive tribe. According to Wilkins, Fawcett was still alive, living among them. This account was never verified, but it sparked renewed interest in the story. Others speculated that Fawcett had discovered Z but had been unable or unwilling to return to the outside world. Perhaps he had found a society so advanced, so untouched by modernity, that he chose to stay. Meanwhile, the scientific community began to uncover evidence that lent credence to Fawcett's theories. Archaeologists studying the Amazon found remnants of massive earthworks, including geometric patterns and raised fields that indicated large-scale agriculture. These discoveries challenged the long-held belief that the Amazon was a counterfeit paradise incapable of supporting complex societies. The evidence suggested that millions of people once lived in the region, their civilizations sophisticated and interconnected. This newfound understanding has come to be known as the study of geoglyphs and the Amazonian dark earth's fertile, man-made soils that could have supported large populations. Still, the question remains, was Fawcett right about Z? Could his lost city have been one of these ancient hubs of culture, forgotten by time and consumed by the jungle? Or was Z a figment of his imagination, a symbol of his yearning for a world beyond the mundane? As the years passed, the tale of Percy Fawcett evolved into a cultural touchstone. Books like David Grann's The Lost City of Z brought the story to a new generation, blending adventure with historical investigation. In 2016, the story was adapted into a feature film, further cementing Fawcett's place in popular imagination. Yet, even as his legend grows, the truth remains as elusive as the city he sought. There is something deeply human about Fawcett's story. It speaks to our innate desire to explore, to push beyond the boundaries of what we know. It is a reminder that the world, vast and ancient, still holds mysteries we cannot yet comprehend. For Fawcett, the quest for Z was not just about discovery. It was about belief in the unknown, belief in a world that could surprise us, and belief in the possibility of rewriting history. And so, the jungle continues to guard its secrets. The Amazon, with its impenetrable depths and hidden treasures, remains both a challenge and an inspiration to those who dare to dream. Percy Fawcett may have vanished, but his spirit lives on in every explorer, every scientist, and every dreamer who looks to the horizon and wonders what lies beyond. The lost city of Z may or may not exist, but the mystery surrounding it has become a legend in its own right. It is a story of adventure and obsession, of triumph and tragedy, and of the enduring allure of the unknown. And perhaps that is the greatest discovery of all, that even in an age of satellites and GPS, there are still places in this world, and in our imaginations, that remain unexplored. For as long as the Amazon stands, shrouded in mist and mystery, the legend of Colonel Percy Fawcett and his lost expedition will endure, calling to those brave enough to seek what cannot be seen, and to believe in what lies just beyond the edge of the map. Decades passed, and with them came technological advancements that allowed the Amazon to be explored in ways Colonel Fawcett could never have imagined. Satellites mapped the dense forest canopy, radar penetrated the layers of vegetation, and drones flew over regions too hostile or remote for humans. Yet, even with all these tools, the Amazon remained stubbornly enigmatic, as if the jungle itself conspired to keep its secrets hidden. Archaeologists and historians began to re-examine Fawcett's claims in light of new discoveries. In the 21st century, researchers uncovered evidence of vast settlements hidden beneath the rainforest. These settlements, often defined by their geoglyphs and intricate networks of roads and canals, suggested that advanced civilizations had indeed thrived in the Amazon centuries before the arrival of Europeans. Some of these findings aligned eerily well with the descriptions in the manuscript 512 that had inspired Fawcett's quest. One of the most startling discoveries was the presence of terra preta, or black earth, a man-made soil rich in nutrients. This soil had been engineered by ancient inhabitants to sustain large-scale agriculture in an otherwise poor environment. The sheer scope of its use suggested that the Amazon might once have supported populations numbering in the millions, a revelation that turned centuries of assumptions about the region on their head. Could these ancient civilizations have been the inspiration for Fawcett's Z? Or had Z existed as a real city, hidden deeper within the jungle, possibly a hub for these interconnected societies? Researchers were divided. Some believed that Fawcett had misinterpreted the evidence and that Z was a symbolic amalgamation of the many ancient cultures that once thrived in the Amazon. Others argued that his descriptions of monumental architecture hinted at something greater, something yet to be uncovered. Even the indigenous tribes of the Amazon, with their oral histories and legends, seemed to guard fragments of the puzzle. Some tribes told stories of their ancestors being part of vast cities, while others spoke of sacred places deep in the jungle that outsiders were forbidden to enter. It wasn't difficult to imagine Fawcett stumbling upon one of these tribes and either being killed for trespassing or choosing to integrate himself into their community, abandoning the modern world altogether. In the mid-2000s, a particularly intriguing expedition emerged from an area in the Xingu River basin. Archaeologists uncovered a network of circular villages, carefully organized and connected by roadways. These settlements seemed to match descriptions of Fawcett's Z in terms of their size and sophistication. The discovery bolstered the idea that Z might not have been a singular city but a complex network of urban centers, a thriving civilization that had been forgotten after the collapse of its population due to disease brought by European contact. But even as science edged closer to validating Fawcett's theories, his fate remained unresolved. Every year, amateur explorers ventured into the jungle to search for clues about the missing expedition. Some returned with wild tales of skeletal remains or artifacts, though none could be definitively linked to Fawcett. Others never returned at all, adding to the mystique and danger of the legend. In 2004, an anthropologist named James Lynch published a controversial theory suggesting that Fawcett had not died but had chosen to live in the jungle. Based on testimonies from local tribes, Lynch argued that Fawcett had integrated into an isolated community, marrying into the tribe and adopting their way of life. The theory was tantalizing but speculative, and without hard evidence, it joined the growing list of possibilities. Even more fantastical accounts emerged, suggesting that Fawcett had stumbled upon an interdimensional gateway or a sacred site that had absorbed him into its mysteries. While these ideas veered into the realm of the supernatural, they underscored the almost mythological status Fawcett had attained. But for all the speculation, it was the human side of Fawcett's story that continued to resonate most deeply. His letters, preserved by his family, revealed a man torn between his duty to his loved ones and his calling to explore. One letter, written shortly before his departure, expressed his hope that his discovery would benefit humanity and justify the sacrifices he and his family had made. It was clear that for Fawcett, Z was not just a city, it was a symbol of the potential for humanity to transcend its limitations and rediscover a lost connection with the natural world. As the years marched on, the legend of Percy Fawcett became less about finding answers and more about the pursuit of mystery itself. His story inspired countless explorers, scientists, and dreamers to venture into the unknown, each carrying a piece of his spirit with them. The jungle, vast and indifferent, continued to resist full understanding, as if reminding humanity that some questions are meant to remain unanswered. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Percy Fawcett, the understanding that mystery is as vital to the human experience as discovery. In a world where so much has been charted and explained, the idea that there are still blank spaces on the map is both humbling and exhilarating. For Fawcett, the search for Z was not just a quest for a lost city but a journey into the heart of what it means to be human, curious, daring, and eternally hopeful. And so, the jungle endures, whispering its secrets to those brave enough to listen. The tale of Percy Fawcett remains a beacon for adventurers and a reminder that even in our age of reason, there are places where imagination reigns supreme. Whether Z exists as a physical city or as a symbol of human potential, its legacy is undeniable. As long as the Amazon remains wild and untamed, and as long as there are those willing to seek the unknown, the spirit of Percy Fawcett will never be forgotten. The mystery of Colonel Percy Fawcett and the lost city of Z stands as a timeless reminder of humanity's insatiable thirst for discovery. It is not merely a story of an explorer who vanished into the depths of the Amazon, it is a narrative that reflects the tension between the known and the unknown, the drive to uncover the truths of the past, and the courage to venture into the unexplored. Fawcett's disappearance, while tragic, has ensured his place in history not just as an adventurer but as a symbol of unyielding curiosity and determination. His quest for Z may never have led to a physical city, but in many ways, it transcended geography. It became a journey of ideas, inspiring countless people to question conventional wisdom and to see the world as a place still filled with wonder and possibility. The Amazon, vast and enigmatic, continues to guard its secrets. Perhaps one day, advancements in technology or a stroke of luck will reveal the answers that have eluded us for nearly a century. But even if the truth remains hidden, Fawcett's story will endure, carried on by the whispers of the jungle and the imaginations of those who hear it. In the end, Percy Fawcett's legacy is not measured by the discoveries he made or the mysteries he left behind, but by the enduring power of his dream. He reminds us that the world is not as small or as comprehensible as we might think, and that some mysteries are best left to inspire, to challenge, and to remind us of the infinite possibilities that lie just beyond the horizon. As long as there are those who dare to seek, to dream, and to push the boundaries of the possible, the spirit of Percy Fawcett will live on, not lost in the jungle, but alive in the hearts of explorers everywhere. And so, the legend of Colonel Percy Fawcett comes to a close not with answers, but with questions that continue to ignite our imagination. His story reminds us that the world is still full of mysteries, waiting to be unraveled, hidden in the shadows of time and nature. Whether Z was real or a dream, whether Fawcett found it or disappeared chasing it, one thing is certain: His courage and determination remain an enduring symbol of the human spirit's unyielding desire to explore the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths of history and the uncharted Amazon. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more mysteries, make sure to subscribe to Cryptiverse. Let me know in the comments what you think happened to Percy Fawcett and if the lost city of Z could still be out there. Until next time, stay curious, stay adventurous, and keep exploring the unexplained. This is
The Greenbrier Ghost, a tale of love, loss, and the unseen. The winter winds of 1897 swept through the hills of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, carrying with them an air of quiet foreboding. The land, blanketed in frost and silence, seemed untouched by the chaos of the world beyond its borders. Here, life moved at a pace dictated by the seasons, by the rhythm of the sun and the toil of those who called the Appalachian Mountains their home. In a small cabin on the outskirts of the county, Zona Hester Shue hummed softly to herself as she stirred a pot of stew over the fire. The warm glow of the hearth illuminated her delicate features, her auburn hair catching the light like strands of copper. She was a striking woman, full of life and vitality, her laughter a melody that had once filled the woods around her home. But in recent months, that laughter had become rare, replaced by a quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air like an unspoken secret. Her husband, Erasmus Edward Shue, sat in a wooden chair near the window, sharpening a blade with methodical precision. His dark eyes flicked up occasionally to watch Zona as she worked, but his expression remained unreadable. There was a hardness to Edward, a coldness that had only grown more pronounced since their wedding day less than a year ago. Zona had been swept off her feet by Edward's charm, his rugged good looks, and his promises of a better life. But beneath his handsome exterior lay a temper that flared like a storm, unpredictable and dangerous. She had learned to tread carefully around him, her once fiery spirit dimmed by the weight of his presence. As the stew simmered, Zona glanced out the window, her gaze drifting to the snow-covered hills beyond. A sense of unease gnawed at her, though she couldn't quite place its source. Perhaps it was the isolation of their cabin, far from the nearest neighbor. Or perhaps it was the way Edward's moods shifted like the wind, leaving her constantly on edge. "Dinner's ready," she said softly, setting two bowls on the rough-hewn table. Edward stood, his movements deliberate, and took his place at the table. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the clink of spoons against ceramic. Zona's mind wandered as she ate, her thoughts straying to her mother, Mary Jane Hester, who lived just a few miles away. She hadn't seen her in weeks, and the ache of homesickness was a constant companion. "I'm going to visit Ma tomorrow," Zona said, breaking the silence. Edward's spoon paused midair, and he looked at her with a frown. "You don't need to be running off every time you feel like it," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've got responsibilities here." Zona's heart sank, but she kept her tone steady. "It's been weeks, Edward. She'll be worried about me." He set his spoon down with a thud, his gaze hardening. "I said no. That should be the end of it." Zona nodded, swallowing her frustration along with the lump in her throat. She knew better than to push him when he was in this mood. The rest of the meal passed in strained silence, and when they finally retired for the night, Zona lay awake long after Edward's snores filled the room. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and longing. She missed her mother's comforting presence, missed the days when her laughter had come easily. But most of all, she missed the sense of freedom she had once taken for granted. As sleep finally claimed her, Zona dreamed of a time before Edward, before the weight of his anger had settled over her like a shroud. In her dreams, she was running through the woods, the sunlight filtering through the trees and the sound of her mother's voice calling her home. The days passed in a blur of routine and tension. Zona busied herself with chores, finding solace in the rhythm of her work. But the unease that had taken root in her heart only grew, a shadow that refused to be ignored. One crisp January morning, Edward left early, claiming he had business to attend to in town. Zona watched him ride off, her breath clouding in the cold air. The moment he was out of sight, she felt a weight lift from her chest, replaced by a sense of urgency. She gathered her shawl and stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath her boots. The path to her mother's house was familiar, the trees standing like silent sentinels as she made her way through the woods. With each step, her resolve grew stronger. She needed to see her mother, needed to feel the warmth of her embrace and hear her reassuring words. When she arrived at the Hester home, Mary Jane greeted her with open arms, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter. "Zona, my girl, I was beginning to worry about you," she said, pulling her into a tight hug. Zona smiled, but the worry in her mother's eyes didn't escape her notice. "I'm fine, Ma. I just needed to see you." Mary Jane led her inside, the warmth of the fire and the smell of freshly baked bread enveloping Zona like a comforting blanket. They spent the day talking, laughing, and catching up, but Zona couldn't bring herself to share the full extent of her troubles. She didn't want to burden her mother or risk causing a rift between Mary Jane and Edward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Zona reluctantly prepared to leave. Mary Jane walked her to the door, her hand lingering on Zona's arm. "If you ever need anything, you come straight to me," she said, her voice firm. Zona nodded, her heart aching with gratitude. "I will, Ma. I promise." The journey back to the cabin was uneventful, but the sense of unease returned the moment Zona stepped through the door. Edward was sitting by the fire, his expression unreadable as he watched her enter. "Where've you been?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with an edge. "I went to see Ma," Zona replied, keeping her voice steady. Edward's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she thought he might explode. But instead, he merely nodded and turned back to the fire. Zona released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She knew she had taken a risk by defying him, but the visit to her mother had been worth it. It had reminded her that she wasn't entirely alone, that there was still a spark of hope to hold onto. But that spark would soon be extinguished. The Greenbrier Ghost, A Tale of Love, Loss, and the Unseen, Part 2. The days that followed Zona's visit to her mother were marked by an uneasy calm. Edward's mood had been surprisingly subdued, though it was hard to tell whether this was genuine or the quiet before another storm. Zona carried on with her daily routines, finding small moments of solace in the beauty of the surrounding landscape. The snow-covered hills shimmered in the sunlight, and the forest seemed alive with whispers of life beneath the frozen surface. But beneath this peaceful veneer, Zona's unease continued to grow. It was as if the woods themselves were trying to warn her, the rustling branches and the distant calls of crows filling her with an inexplicable dread. She often found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone lurking in the shadows. One evening, as she sat by the fire mending a tear in her dress, Edward returned home earlier than usual. His boots thudded heavily against the wooden floor as he entered, and Zona immediately sensed that something was different. "You've been quiet lately," Edward said, his tone neutral but his gaze sharp. Zona looked up, startled by the suddenness of his comment. "Just tired, that's all," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Edward didn't respond immediately. He walked to the fire and stared into the flames, his face illuminated by the flickering light. "You're not hiding anything from me, are you?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and dangerous. Zona's hands stilled, the needle trembling between her fingers. "Of course not," she said, forcing a smile. Edward turned to face her, his eyes narrowing as if trying to read her thoughts. For a moment, the room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. But then he shrugged and sat down in his chair, as if satisfied for now. Zona released a quiet breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew better than to let her guard down, but the strain of constantly walking on eggshells was beginning to wear on her. Whispers in the night. That night, Zona lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Edward's snores filled the room, a rhythmic reminder of his presence even in slumber. The cabin was dark and silent, save for the occasional creak of the wooden beams and the distant howl of the wind. But as the hours dragged on, Zona became aware of another sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from the direction of the window, a soft murmur that sent chills racing down her spine. She sat up slowly, her breath catching in her throat. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The whisper ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Zona stared at the window, her eyes straining to see through the darkness. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, a pale, ghostly figure just beyond the glass. Her heart raced as she reached for the lamp on the bedside table, fumbling to light it. The room was bathed in a warm glow, and Zona's eyes darted to the window. But there was nothing there, only the reflection of her own frightened face staring back at her. Zona sat back against the headboard, clutching the lamp like a lifeline. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the light and her own growing paranoia. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her. The ties that bind. The following morning, Zona woke early and began her chores as usual, determined to shake off the unease of the night before. She swept the floors, tended to the fire, and prepared breakfast, all the while trying to ignore the heavy feeling in her chest. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to her mother. Mary Jane had always been her rock, her source of strength and wisdom. Zona longed to confide in her, to share the fears that had taken root in her heart. But she knew Edward would never allow another visit so soon. Later that day, as she gathered water from the well, Zona was startled by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, expecting to see Edward, but instead found herself face to face with Anderson Jones, the young boy who often ran errands for the Shoes. "Good morning, Mrs. Shoe," Anderson said, tipping his hat politely. "Good morning, Anderson," Zona replied, her voice warm despite her surprise. "What brings you out here?" "Mr. Shoe sent me," the boy said, shifting nervously. "He said to ask if you needed anything from town." Zona frowned, puzzled by Edward's sudden thoughtfulness. "That's kind of him," she said cautiously. "But I don't think we need anything at the moment." Anderson nodded, his expression uneasy. "If you say so, ma'am. But if you ever need help, you just let me know." Zona smiled, touched by the boy's earnestness. "Thank you, Anderson. That means a lot." As the boy turned to leave, Zona watched him go, her heart heavy with gratitude and sadness. Even in her isolation, there were still small acts of kindness to remind her that she wasn't entirely alone. The gathering storm days turned into weeks, and the winter deepened its grip on Greenbrier County. The snow fell heavier, the nights grew colder, and the sense of foreboding that had haunted Zona seemed to tighten its hold. Edward's moods became increasingly volatile, his temper flaring over the smallest things. Zona learned to tread even more carefully, avoiding confrontation whenever possible. But no matter how hard she tried, it seemed she could never truly appease him. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Edward suddenly spoke, his voice sharp and accusatory. "You've been talking to your mother, haven't you?" Zona froze, her mind racing. "I haven't seen her since the last time I went to visit," she said carefully. Edward leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "Don't lie to me, Zona. I know you've been sending messages." Zona's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. "I haven't," she insisted, her voice trembling. Edward stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You'd better not be lying," he said, his tone menacing. Zona's heart pounded as he stormed out of the room, leaving her alone with her fear. She knew she couldn't go on like this, living in constant terror of his wrath. But what choice did she have? As she sat in the flickering light of the fire, Zona's thoughts turned once again to her mother. Mary Jane had always said that the truth had a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it was buried.
The summer of 1971 was quiet in the small Spanish village of Belmez de la Moraleda, nestled in the hills of Jaén. Life moved slowly, with little more than the routine of farming and family life to occupy the villagers. But one day, everything changed. It began in the home of Maria Gomez Camara, a modest house with a cement floor in the kitchen. Maria had been preparing lunch when something peculiar caught her eye. On the cold, gray concrete beneath her feet, a faint shape began to take form. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a discoloration or a stain. But as the days passed, the shape grew more distinct. A face. Not just any face, it was human-like, with deep-set eyes that seemed to stare back at her, a mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-sentence, and features that were eerily lifelike. Maria, a devout Catholic, was terrified. She tried scrubbing the image away, but no amount of cleaning could erase it. Frustrated and unnerved, she called her husband and son for help. They decided to chip away the section of the concrete floor entirely, replacing it with fresh cement. For a brief time, life returned to normal. But just as the family began to relax, another face appeared in the exact same spot. Then another. Word of the phenomenon spread quickly through the village. Neighbors and friends came to see for themselves. Some were skeptical, dismissing the faces as nothing more than stains or tricks of the mind. But others were convinced that something supernatural was at play. The faces weren't just vague impressions, they had personality. Some appeared sad, others angry or pained. Maria's home soon became a hub of activity. Curious visitors traveled from neighboring towns to witness the so-called Belmez faces. As the crowds grew, so did the faces. Over time, new ones emerged in different parts of the house. Each face was unique, as if capturing the essence of a different individual. The phenomenon caught the attention of paranormal investigators and scientists alike. A group of experts was called in to study the faces, hoping to uncover a rational explanation. Samples of the concrete were taken and analyzed, but the results were inconclusive. There was no evidence of paint or artificial pigmentation. Skeptics argued that the faces were a clever hoax, orchestrated by Maria and her family to attract attention. Some even suggested the use of chemicals to create the effect. But if it was a hoax, it was an elaborate one that would have required precise skill and a significant amount of time. And Maria, by all accounts, was a simple woman with no interest in fame or fortune. As investigators dug deeper, a chilling discovery was made. Beneath the house lay an ancient burial site. Human remains were found, dating back centuries. Could this explain the phenomenon? Were the faces the spirits of the dead, trying to make contact with the living? For decades, the mystery of the Belmez faces remained unsolved. Scientists, skeptics, and paranormal enthusiasts debated the origins of the phenomenon, but no definitive answer was ever found. Maria Gomez Camara passed away in 2004, taking her secrets with her. Yet even after her death, the faces continued to appear, as if defying explanation. To this day, the Belmez faces are one of the most compelling unsolved mysteries in paranormal history. Whether a supernatural phenomenon, a clever hoax, or an unexplained quirk of nature, they continue to captivate the imaginations of all who hear their story. And so, the faces remain a silent testament to the unknown, etched into the concrete floor of a small house in a quiet Spanish village. Let's continue. The Mystery of the Belmez Faces, by Cryptoverse. Chapter 1, A Face in the Floor. It was the kind of day that Maria Gomez Camara had lived through 1,000 times before. The sun blazed high above the small Spanish village of Belmez de la Moraleda, bathing the rolling hills and cobblestone streets in golden light. Life here was quiet, predictable even. Maria spent her mornings tending to chores and her afternoons in the cool shade of her kitchen, preparing meals for her family. But this day, this ordinary day in August 1971, would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would transform her life and her unassuming home into the focus of international intrigue. As Maria moved about her kitchen, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of the evening meal, her foot brushed against something on the cement floor. She paused, her brow furrowing. There, etched faintly in the gray concrete, was a stain. At least, that's what it seemed at first glance. She knelt down for a closer look. The longer she stared, the more the stain seemed to take shape. It wasn't just a random smear of discoloration. No, this was deliberate. A face human-like, with deep, shadowed eyes and a mouth frozen in a strange, sorrowful expression. Maria recoiled, a chill racing down her spine. She called out to her husband, Juan, her voice trembling. When he arrived, she pointed to the floor, struggling to find the words to explain what she had seen. Juan squatted down beside her, his calloused hands tracing the edges of the image. It's just a stain, he said, trying to reassure her. Probably nothing. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. That night, as the family sat down to dinner, Maria's eyes kept drifting back to the face on the floor. The dim light of the oil lamp cast flickering shadows across the room, and for a moment, she thought she saw the face move a trick of the light. Perhaps, or her own overactive imagination. The next morning, Maria decided to take action. Armed with a bucket of soapy water and a stiff-bristled brush, she scrubbed at the face until her arms ached. But no matter how hard she worked, the image refused to budge. Frustrated, she called Juan once again. This time, Juan brought a hammer and chisel. He chipped away the section of the floor where the face had appeared, replacing it with fresh concrete. For a time, the problem seemed solved. The face was gone, and Maria could breathe easy again. But her relief was short-lived. Just a week later, as Maria entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast, she froze in her tracks. There, in the same spot where the first face had appeared, was another. This one was different, more defined. Its eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, and its expression was one of pain, anguish, even. Word spread quickly through the village. Neighbors began to gather at Maria's home, each eager to catch a glimpse of the mysterious face. Some crossed themselves and muttered prayers under their breath, while others whispered rumors of curses and restless spirits. Maria's kitchen had become the talk of Belmez de la Moralita. But the mystery was only beginning. Chapter 2, The Faces Multiply. In the weeks that followed the appearance of the second face, Maria Gomez Camara found her once quiet life turned upside down. Her kitchen, which had been her sanctuary, became a source of dread. The face refused to leave, and no amount of scrubbing or attempts to cover it could erase its presence. Worse, it wasn't alone. For long. One morning, as Maria entered the kitchen, she stopped cold. Beside the original face, another had appeared smaller, rounder, and even more detailed. The new face seemed to wear an expression of sadness, its mouth slightly downturned, its hollow eyes piercing. Maria screamed, drawing the attention of her husband and son. When they arrived, they stared in disbelief. It was undeniable now. The faces were real, and they were multiplying. News of the phenomenon began to spread beyond the village. Curious locals, skeptics, and the deeply religious came to Maria's home, drawn by whispers of a haunting. Some claimed the faces were signs from God, warnings of judgment. Others believed they were curses, left by restless spirits seeking peace. Maria felt the weight of their scrutiny and judgment. The villagers began to speculate wildly about her family's history and the land beneath her home. Rumors swirled that the property had once been a burial ground, though no one could confirm it. Feeling the pressure of the growing crowds and unable to bear the faces staring back at her, Maria once again called upon her husband. This time, the family resolved to take more drastic measures. They decided to dig beneath the faces, to see if the ground held any clues to the mysterious phenomenon. When the digging began, the villagers gathered outside, watching with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The sound of shovels scraping against dirt echoed through the quiet streets of Belmez. After hours of labor, one uncovered something chilling: human remains. Bones ancient and weathered were buried directly beneath the kitchen floor. Maria's heart sank. The discovery seemed to confirm the rumors. Her home had been built atop a grave. The family worked with the local authorities to remove the remains and give them a proper burial. Maria hoped that this act of respect would bring peace to the souls beneath her home and, perhaps, an end to the faces. But her hope was short-lived. Days after the bones were removed, new faces began to emerge. They appeared in different parts of the kitchen, their features more detailed and expressive than before. Some seemed to scream in silent agony, their mouths wide open. Others appeared serene, almost peaceful. Each face was unique, as if capturing the essence of a different individual. By now, Maria's home had become a sensation. Reporters and investigators from across Spain arrived to document the phenomenon. Photographs of the faces were published in newspapers, sparking debates about their origin. Some believed the faces were a hoax, created by Maria and her family to gain attention or financial benefit. But those who knew the family dismissed this idea. Maria had never sought fame, and the constant flow of visitors brought more stress than joy. Paranormal investigators were called in to study the faces. They conducted experiments, using everything from chemical tests to electromagnetic readings. The results were baffling. There was no evidence of paint or tampering. The faces seemed to emerge from within the cement itself, as if formed by some unknown force. For every explanation offered, more questions arose. If the faces were a natural phenomenon, why did they appear so detailed and expressive? If they were hoaxes, how had they been created without leaving a trace? And why did they keep appearing, even after the floor was replaced? Maria found herself at the center of a storm of speculation. The attention was overwhelming, but the faces continued to haunt her. No matter how many times the floor was replaced, they returned each time more vivid, more haunting. The phenomenon became known as the Belmez faces, and Maria's home was declared one of the most mysterious places in the world. But as the years went on, the mystery only deepened. Chapter 3, The Eyes of the Unknown. The growing fame of the Belmez faces brought a steady stream of visitors to Maria's home. At first, the attention was manageable, a few curious villagers peering in from the doorway, whispering nervously about the faces etched into the concrete floor. But soon, Maria's kitchen was flooded with reporters, scientists, and paranormal investigators, all eager to study the mysterious images. For Maria, it was as if her home no longer belonged to her. Strangers wandered freely, pointing at the faces, snapping photographs, and offering theories. Some swore the faces were divine signs, messages from the saints or the Virgin Mary. Others claimed they were demonic, a curse brought upon Maria for reasons unknown. Among the visitors was a local historian, intrigued by the discovery of human remains beneath the house. His research revealed that Belmez de la Moraleda had a dark and violent past. During the Spanish Civil War, countless lives had been lost, and many victims were buried in unmarked graves. Even before the war, the land was believed to have been a burial ground during the medieval period. These souls may not be at rest, the historian told Maria. The faces could be their way of reaching out, asking for peace. Maria was unconvinced. She wasn't a superstitious woman, but the constant appearances of new faces were wearing her down. Each time she walked into her kitchen, she felt their eyes on her. Even at night, when the house was quiet, she could feel their presence, as if the faces were watching her through the walls. One evening, as Maria lay in bed, she heard a faint sound coming from the kitchen. It was a low hum, almost imperceptible, like the murmur of distant voices. She clutched the rosary beneath her pillow and whispered a prayer. When morning came, she found another face on the floor, larger and more detailed than any before. This one was different. Its eyes were hollow, its expression frozen in a scream of terror. Maria's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor. The villagers claimed the face was a bad omen. Some suggested performing an exorcism, while others insisted that Maria should leave the house entirely. But Maria refused to abandon her home. "This is my house," she said. "I won't let them drive me away." The arrival of the new face sparked renewed interest from the media. A team of researchers from Madrid visited the house to conduct a thorough investigation. They brought advanced equipment, including infrared cameras and chemical analyzers, hoping to uncover the truth behind the faces. The researchers tested the cement, searching for traces of paint or other substances that could explain the phenomenon. But the results were inconclusive. The faces appeared to be part of the cement itself, their pigmentation embedded deep within the material. One scientist proposed a theory: the faces were the result of pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns, especially faces in random objects. According to this theory, the discolorations on the floor were natural, but Maria's mind had given them meaning, interpreting them as faces. But this explanation failed to satisfy the skeptics. The faces were too detailed, too lifelike, to be mere accidents. And what about the timing? How could natural stains appear so quickly, always in the same room? As the debate raged on, the faces continued to multiply. Some appeared faint, their features barely discernible. Others were vivid, almost as if they had been painted with a fine brush. Over time, the faces began to take on new expressions. Some looked calm, even serene. Others seemed to writhe in agony, their mouths twisted into silent screams. Maria began to keep a journal, documenting the appearances of each new face. She described their features in detail, noting their size, shape, and expression. She also recorded the strange phenomena that accompanied their appearances: the whispers in the night, the feeling of being watched, the inexplicable cold that sometimes filled the kitchen. Her entries grew darker as the years went on. January 3, 1972, another face today. It's smaller than the others, but its eyes are so lifelike. I can't bear to look at it for too long. I feel like it's staring back at me, judging me. What do they want from me? Why won't they leave me alone? February 15, 1972, I heard the voices again last night. They were louder this time. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded angry. When I went into the kitchen this morning, I found 3 new faces. One of them looks like a child. I feel like I'm losing my mind. As Maria struggled to maintain her sanity, the visitors kept coming. Some offered prayers, lighting candles in the kitchen and leaving small crosses on the floor. Others brought cameras, determined to capture proof of the supernatural. But no one could offer an explanation that satisfied Maria. The faces remained a mystery, a puzzle that no one could solve. Chapter 4: The Unseen Hand. As the Belmez faces continued to appear, so too did a sense of unease that seemed to permeate the home. Maria began to notice strange occurrences, little things that seemed too coincidental to ignore. Objects would move when no one was around, chairs left slightly askew, cabinets left open. The air felt thicker in the kitchen, heavier, as if something was always hovering just outside her field of vision. One day, while cleaning the kitchen, Maria was startled by a sharp noise. She turned around quickly, expecting to see her husband or son, but no one was there. The noise had come from the far corner of the room, the same spot where the faces often appeared. As she cautiously approached the corner, she saw it a new face, this one, darker and more sinister than the others. It was as though the face was watching her, its hollow eyes following her movements. Maria's heart raced, and she backed away slowly, feeling a strange chill sweep through her body. Her husband, Juan, was becoming increasingly concerned. The faces, the strange occurrences, the unsettling feeling in the house, it was all taking a toll on his wife. He suggested they leave the house for a while, perhaps go stay with relatives in a nearby town. But Maria refused. She couldn't explain it, but something deep inside her told her that leaving would not bring peace. Instead, she sought out the help of a priest. Father Manuel, a respected figure in the village, had heard about the faces but had not yet visited the house. Maria invited him, desperate for any kind of answer. Father Manuel arrived one afternoon, his expression a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes scanning the faces on the floor. He knelt down and placed his hand over one of the images. A deep frown creased his forehead. "Do you feel anything?" Maria asked, her voice trembling. Father Manuel closed his eyes for a moment, as if deep in thought. Then he spoke, his voice calm but tinged with uncertainty. "I feel an energy, but it is not a peaceful one. This house, this place is troubled. I cannot say for certain what is causing the faces, but I believe that they are tied to something much older, something that cannot easily be dismissed." Maria listened intently, hoping for answers but fearing that Father Manuel's words would only add to the mystery. Father Manuel performed a blessing on the house, sprinkling holy water around the kitchen and reciting prayers in Latin. The atmosphere grew tense, and for a moment, Maria thought she saw the faces flicker, as though they were fading away. But when the prayer ended and the house grew quiet, the faces remained more vivid than ever. "I'm afraid," Father Manuel admitted, his voice heavy with resignation, "that there is little I can do. What we are dealing with here is not easily understood. I will continue to pray for you and your family, but I suggest you seek further counsel, perhaps from someone with experience in the paranormal." Maria felt a deep sense of frustration. She had hoped for a resolution, for some kind of explanation, but it seemed the answers were as elusive as ever. The next few weeks were too quiet. The faces stopped appearing, and the strange occurrences ceased. Maria began to wonder if perhaps the blessing had worked, if the spirits had finally found peace. She tried to return to normal life, preparing meals for her family and cleaning the house. But then, one evening in late spring, the faces reappeared, this time, with an intensity that took Maria's breath away. The first one appeared late at night. Maria had just finished cleaning the kitchen and was preparing to go to bed when she saw it, a face in the center of the floor, as if formed out of the very wood itself. This one was different. It was almost lifelike, the details so intricate that it seemed as though it were a living person staring up at her. Maria's hand trembled as she reached for a chair to steady herself. She knew, deep down, that this face was no ordinary apparition. It seemed to convey something urgent, almost pleading. The next morning, the faces multiplied. There were 3, each one in a different part of the kitchen. Each one appeared to be watching her, as if silently communicating with her. Maria was horrified, but at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to leave the house. She couldn't explain why, but she felt as though she were somehow connected to these faces, as if they were trying to tell her something. That afternoon, as Maria sat in the kitchen, she noticed something strange. The faces seemed to shift, subtly altering their expressions. The face that had once appeared to be pleading now seemed angry, its eyes narrowed, its mouth twisted into a scowl. Another face, which had been calm, now appeared frightened. Maria's mind raced. Could the faces be responding to something in her life? Were they trying to communicate with her, or were they simply manifestations of her own fears and anxieties? The next day, she reached out to a paranormal investigator named Jorge Luis, who had worked on similar cases throughout Spain. He agreed to visit the house and perform an extensive investigation. When Jorge arrived, he brought a team of specialists with him, experts in parapsychology, psychologists, and even a renowned medium. They set up cameras and began their examination of the kitchen. Jorge Luis began with a calm and methodical approach. He asked Maria about her family history, about any past experiences with strange occurrences or paranormal events. Maria recounted the strange happenings, the faces, the voices she had heard, and the growing sense of unease in her home. After hours of testing, Jorge finally sat down with Maria to discuss his findings. "We've seen some strange readings," he said, "but nothing that would explain the faces. There's no evidence of any external influence, no scientific explanation for what's happening. It's as though these faces are appearing from within the material itself." Maria's heart sank. "What does that mean?" Jorge looked at her gravely. "It means that whatever is happening here is beyond our understanding. These faces are not simply the result of some natural phenomenon. There is something more at play, something we can't see, something we can't touch. And I fear that it's tied to something dark, something buried beneath the house." Chapter 5: The Dark History Unfolds. As the weeks passed, the mystery surrounding the Belmez faces only deepened. Maria's home had become a place of pilgrimage for those seeking answers, scientists, religious figures, paranormal experts, and thrill-seekers alike. Yet, despite the countless investigations and theories, no one could explain the origin of the faces. Some thought they were a hoax, others believed they were the result of some kind of unexplained phenomenon, but all were drawn to the idea that the faces were somehow tied to the land itself. Jorge Luis, the paranormal investigator, continued his research in the home, becoming more involved than he had initially anticipated. The faces, he concluded, were not simply an anomaly of nature or human perception, they were something more sinister. They were linked to the land beneath the house, which, as the local historian had discovered, had a dark and violent past. Maria had heard the rumors about the village's history, the tales of wars, killings, and betrayals. But it wasn't until Jorge shared his findings that the full scope of the past came into view. The land on which her house had been built had once been the site of brutal executions during the Spanish Civil War. Thousands of political prisoners, deemed enemies of the state, had been tortured and killed in the area. Their bodies were left in unmarked graves, their spirits restless, their lives forgotten by the passage of time. The faces, Jorge said, his voice low with concern, are likely the souls of those who perished here. They've been trapped in the land, their pain and suffering imprinted on the very earth itself. The images you see are their way of reaching out, trying to be remembered, to have their stories told. Maria listened in stunned silence. She had never imagined that the land her family had lived on for generations held such a dark history. It made sense in a way. How else could something so inexplicable take shape in her kitchen? But if the faces were indeed the spirits of the lost, why were they appearing now, decades after their deaths? What was it that had caused the faces to emerge at this particular time? Jorge theorized that the spiritual energy of the land had become restless once again, disturbed by an event or force. He speculated that the sudden surge of attention, the media, the visitors, the scientific investigations had somehow acted as a catalyst, awakening the spirits from their long slumber. Maria couldn't help but feel the weight of this revelation. It was one thing to live with an inexplicable phenomenon, it was another to realize that the very ground beneath her feet was the source of a great tragedy. She wondered if the faces were trying to communicate, if there was something they needed her to understand. Desperate for answers, Maria decided to dig deeper into the history of the land. She spent hours at the local archives, poring over old records and documents that had been stored away for decades. It wasn't until she uncovered a series of letters, written by a man named Antonio Martinez, that the mystery began to take shape. Antonio had been a prominent figure in the village during the Civil War. A member of a local militia, he had been directly involved in the executions of suspected enemies of the state. The letters, which had been written during the war, revealed a chilling account of the atrocities committed in the area. Antonio spoke of the people he had killed, men and women, fathers and sons, and the haunting memories that followed him. One particular letter stood out. In it, Antonio confessed that he had been forced to execute a group of innocent civilians who had been falsely accused of being spies. Their deaths weighed heavily on him, and he described hearing their voices in the night, calling out for justice. As he wrote, he seemed to grow more paranoid, fearing that the spirits of the victims would come to claim him. The final letter was dated just before the end of the war. In it, Antonio expressed his fear that the spirits of those he had killed were seeking vengeance. He spoke of the land itself becoming cursed, and of the faces that would one day appear, as if the souls of the dead were trapped in the earth, unable to rest. Maria's hands trembled as she read the letter. She realized that Antonio Martinez had been the last person to know the full extent of the suffering that had occurred on the land. His words confirmed what Jorge had suggested: the faces were the spirits of the victims, unable to find peace. But why had they waited so long to make themselves known? Why had the faces appeared in her kitchen, of all places? Maria couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt. She had always believed that the faces were a random occurrence, a strange and unsettling part of her life. But now she understood that they were part of a much larger story, one that had been buried for decades. Determined to understand the full truth, Maria returned to her home and began to study the faces with renewed focus. She had seen them change before, their expressions shifting from calm to angry, from peaceful to anguished. But now, as she stared at the floor, she noticed something new. The faces seemed to have begun interacting with one another. They weren't just isolated images, they were communicating, silently telling a story that had remained hidden for far too long. Over the next few days, the faces became more distinct. Some were old, others young. Some appeared to be soldiers, others civilians. One face, a young woman with sorrowful eyes, seemed to plead for help, as if trapped in a nightmare. Another, a man with a deep scar across his face, stared out with a look of bitterness and rage. Maria felt a deep sadness for the souls whose stories had been lost in time. She couldn't shake the feeling that the faces were trying to tell her something, that they had been waiting for someone to hear their stories. She sought out Father Manuel once again, hoping that he could provide some guidance. The priest listened carefully to her account of the faces, his expression grim. "I've been praying for you and your family," Father Manuel said softly. "But now, I believe you must do something more. You must acknowledge the spirits of the past, give them the recognition they deserve, and ask for their forgiveness." Maria knew that the only way to find peace was to confront the history of the land head-on. She decided to organize a memorial for the victims of the Civil War, a ceremony where the villagers could come together to honor the lives that had been lost and to acknowledge the pain that had been buried for so long. As the day of the memorial approached, Maria felt both anxious and hopeful. She had no idea whether the ceremony would bring an end to the faces, but she knew that it was the only way to move forward. The memorial ceremony was held under the setting sun, with villagers gathering in solemn silence around the makeshift altar set up in the garden of Maria's home. The air was thick with anticipation, a collective breath held by everyone present. Father Manuel led the service, his words resonating with a deep sense of reverence. He spoke of the souls lost to violence, of the innocent lives taken too soon, and of the need for reconciliation and peace. Maria stood in the background, watching as the faces in her kitchen slowly began to fade. She had never expected this moment to be so powerful, nor had she imagined that it would take such a personal toll. But with every prayer and every word spoken, the atmosphere in the house seemed to shift, the heavy presence lifting as though something ancient had been freed. As the last prayer was spoken, the villagers dispersed, their hearts filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. The faces, once so vivid, had begun to disappear. The kitchen, which had long been a place of dread, now seemed oddly quiet, as if the spirits that had haunted it were finally at rest. Maria stayed behind, her thoughts swirling with everything she had learned. The mystery of the Belmez faces, once a source of fear, had transformed into a story of redemption. The past, dark and painful as it had been acknowledged, and with that acknowledgement came a sense of peace, a peace that she never thought possible. The following days were quiet. The kitchen remained clear of any strange occurrences, and the faces, though once so vivid, had faded into the shadows of memory. The land, no longer cursed, had found a kind of closure, and so, too, had Maria. She never forgot the faces that had appeared on her kitchen floor, the souls that had sought recognition for so long. But as time passed, their images grew less frequent in her mind, and the house, once a place of fear and mystery, became a home again. And so, the story of the Belmez faces became a legend, a tale of tragedy and redemption, whispered among the villagers of Belmez. For Maria, it was a chapter in her life that she would carry with her forever, a reminder that the past, though painful, could be healed when faced with courage and compassion. As for the Belmez faces, they faded into history, leaving behind only their fleeting images in the minds of those who had witnessed them, their stories told at last. And with that, the mystery was resolved, leaving behind not fear, but a profound understanding of the deep connection between the living and the dead. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of Spain's most enduring mysteries. The Belmez faces continue to fascinate, but their story now rests in the hands of those who dared to seek answers. And while the faces may be gone, their legacy of grief, redemption, and understanding remains forever.